A vow to end clergy sex abuse.
Diventando così uno strumento di Satana.
The Vatican's historic four-day summit comes to a close. We have a report and reaction from Rome, including from some survivors who are angry. Second meeting. We preview President Trump's high-profile talks this week with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And a Catholic doctor tells us about Christianity's war against infanticide. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, February 25th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Pope vows to wage a war on clergy sex abuse, but offers few specifics, outraging many victims. His words came at the end of a historic four-day summit where bishops heard testimony of victims and discussed how to handle the worldwide crisis. Some hoped Pope Francis would create a new Vatican office to handle misconduct by hierarchy. Others wanted the Pope to put zero tolerance into canon law.
Pope Francis delivered his blueprint for tackling clergy sex abuse before 190 Catholic bishops and religious superiors.
Se nella Chiesa si rilevasse anche un solo caso di abuso.
He summoned the church leaders for a four-day meeting. The goal, to make it clear clergy sex abuse and cover-ups are a global problem, threatening the very mission of the Catholic Church. After the gathering, the Vatican announced it will soon issue a new law to protect children that covers officials in the Holy See.
La tutela dei bambini.
The Pope also offered an 8-point pledge of priorities going forward. But survivors who came to Rome expecting solid, concrete action aren't satisfied.
There's nothing in his remarks about releasing documents that demonstrate the truth of how they are and have been covering up child sex crimes. So what that is secrecy.
Pope Francis did say he wants to change church law governing child pornography. Currently, the church only considers it a serious crime if the child in question is under the age of 14. The Pope wants to raise it to 18. It's not clear if the change was inspired by a recent case involving an Argentine bishop close to Francis. This young survivor is upset the Pope didn't say sorry and says the results of the meeting are just words. Vatican experts say the public is watching the church and growing impatient.
So now the public opinion is waiting, not only the victims, but the good Catholics and also the non-Catholics who believe in the role or who are interested in the role of the church and the social role and the moral role of the church are now waiting for precise norms and rules.
Alan Holdren is our EWTN Rome Bureau Chief, and he joins us now. Alan, many faithful are hopping mad that specific action did not come out of this summit. The Pope unveiled 8 guidelines in his Sunday address. Let's talk about those.
So, Lauren, the Pope made that list of guidelines. He topped it with the protection of minors itself. Also included was preparation and formation of candidates to the priesthood, accompanying victims, boosting and reinforcing the guidelines that seek to implement measures for proper protections. And also he added in curbing online pornography and also sex tourism.
Is anyone calling this meeting a success? I know a lot of survivors I have talked to and many faithful are not saying that.
Well, here in the Vatican, they say that it's a step forward. Just to gather all of these 190 representatives of bishops' conferences and also religious congregations worldwide is a big step. It had never happened before. It really was unprecedented. Also, if they were paying attention and if they choose to move the ball also on this specific issue, bishop accountability. They have a framework that Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago proposed to the group, which they can use to hold each other accountable, but that will depend on the bishops themselves.
Well, this issue of cover-up by the bishops is also getting a lot of attention. So how did the summit specifically address accountability? One group said that they wanted to immediately enact canon law that says anyone found guilty, no matter when, is out.
Yeah, that didn't happen, Lauren. Many people were disappointed about that. We did hear from Archbishop Charles Scicluna, who's the Pope's point man for investigating abuse accusations, and he said that he considers personally the actual abuses to be on a par with their cover-up. And he said that he expects that to be enshrined in law. He's pushing for that, and he said that there's no turning back from this.
He said the wrath of God, he's going to, I think, come down with the wrath of God. Do you think, Alan, in all of your extensive coverage of the Vatican, that this is a turning point for this issue?
I don't think there is any turning back, like Archbishop Scicluna said, Lauren. They have gathered around this issue in Rome. They've talked about concrete measures. They have public opinion and the voice of the faithful in the world pushing this issue, and nobody's going to forget about it. And to say that nothing will come of this, I think, is impossible.
Alan Holdren, thank you so much, our EWTN Rome Bureau Chief.
Thank you, Lauren.
The head of the U.S. bishops calls the global gathering challenging and fruitful and says the body will move forward with new measures to be considered by church leaders at their June meeting. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo says, quote, "Listening to victims' testimonies transforms your heart. I saw that in the faces of my brother bishops. We owe survivors an unyielding vigilance that we may never fail them again." In response to the Vatican summit, victims of abuse have issued a list of demands, including asking Pope Francis to release information about his own alleged involvement in the cover-up in Argentina.
When this summit opened, Pope Francis promised us accountability, responsibility, and transparency. We did not get that. This is what we all deserved. Not only survivors, but the people of the world.
Earlier today, survivors announced 21 points of action for Pope Francis to take. Peter Isley of Ending Clergy Abuse joins us now. Peter, first of all, you joined us at the beginning of this conference. Now you're here at the end. And Cardinal DiNardo, the head of the U.S. bishops, had said that we may never fail these victims again. What is your reaction to his statement?
Well, he's already failed them out of this summit. They're coming out of this summit. They don't have a universal church law and norm that if you sexually assault and abuse a child, you're out of the priesthood. And they don't have a universal law and norm that if you've covered up for those crimes, you're out of the priesthood too. So that's already a big failure. And for Cardinal DiNardo, who's under investigation in Houston for some of the recent conduct about cases, I just find that kind of amazing for him to say that.
Was your voice heard at this summit?
Well, the world heard our voice. And to have survivors from around the world to come here, it's a very emotional time for me and place for survivors. And I brought with me a rosary, actually, from Uganda. These were blessed by the children of Uganda. The president of our organization has raised over $1 million to build a hospital run by nuns in Uganda. That's the kind of people that we have in our organization. And I hung on to this rosary. I can't tell you how difficult. It's right here. And, my mother prayed the rosary every day of her life. Day and night she prayed the rosary. She went to Mass every day. And when she found out about what happened to me, I was in my 20s, and I told her, I was terrified to tell her because of her faith and what it meant to her and to our family. And she didn't leave the church. She didn't stop going to Mass. She kept praying the rosary. They talk about a handbook they need to put together. That's their number one point Francis told them to do. They got the handbook. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's their handbook. That's what they need to start using.
The church moves very slowly and governs collegially. What could the Pope have done keeping this in mind? I am struck by these two documents. As you mentioned, this is the 21 points of action for Pope Francis. These are yours. You say to immediately enact into universal canon law the fact that any cleric who has been found guilty of even a single act of child sex abuse, no matter when the act occurred, will immediately be removed from ministry and permanently removed from the priesthood. The very first one, as you just mentioned, from Pope Francis, is to prepare a practical handbook indicating the steps to be taken by authorities at key moments when a case emerges. It seems like these are pretty different.
Well, You know who doesn't move slowly? Sex offenders. They don't move slowly. I mean, Pope Francis, and I agree with him, he said out here in this balcony, he described priests who assault children as ravenous wolves. Ravenous wolves. And so he's still letting these ravenous wolves be unidentified and in ministry around the world right now? That doesn't make any sense. If you're saying these people are so dangerous, they're eating up destroying our children, tearing them apart, I mean, you get them out of ministry, you get them out of harm's way. You don't have other meetings and make handbooks, you can do that later. And he didn't order these people to go back, these bishops to go back and do that. They should be on the ground, landing all over the place around the world, and that's the first thing they ought to do.
Would you agree, or would you disagree, that something has changed, though? Many say that the mere fact that the Pope has called this meeting a sign of progress?
Let me put it this way. The Pope has declared, he said, a war on child sexual abuse. He's got the generals all up there from around the world who are going to fight this war. And Cardinal Marx gets up and he talks about, oh, we've destroyed documents. We've destroyed criminal evidence of child sex crimes. And then what, we move on to the next subject? I mean, it's really simple. This is not complicated. It's not difficult. This element of it particularly. You have to enact under universal church law. Why is this so difficult? That if you've raped and sexually assaulted a child and you're a priest and you've used a collar to do it, that's what that wolf is dressed in. Children don't know the difference between a wolf and, say, a dog. They think it's safe. You take that man out of harm's way.
Completely understand. Your point of view is so valuable to our audience. We will be checking in with you over the coming months. Thank you so much for joining us. Peter Isley, spokesperson for Ending Clergy Abuse and a survivor. In many ways, the handful of women invited to address the summit stole the show. They delivered their message forcefully and challenged the bishops to act. Sister Veronica Openibo, a native of Nigeria and superior of her religious order, blasted the culture of silence in the church.
So let us not hide such events anymore because of the fear of making mistakes. Too often we want to keep silent until the storm has passed. This storm will not pass. Our credibility as a church is at stake.
Valentina Alizraki, a longtime Vatican reporter from Mexico, told the bishops she was representing first and foremost mothers and families.
Las víctimas no son números, no son estadísticas, son personas.
The veteran journalist who has covered 5 popes over nearly 45 years warned the men, unless they side with the victims, journalists will be their worst enemies. She says that journalists are not vicious wolves. On the contrary, they can join forces against the real wolves. And Linda Ghizzoni, a canon lawyer and official in the Vatican's laity office, delivered a strong message.
In ginocchio davanti al Padre misericordioso.
Bishops kneel before God, victims, and their families. Ghizzoni impressed Pope Francis so much, he delivered an impromptu ode to women at the end of her speech. Coming up, Vice President Pence delivers a message to the Venezuela opposition leader. And the U.S. Ambassador for International Religious Freedom talks about the plight of Christians in Pakistan. At least 14 border bishops from the U.S. and Mexico, a representative from the Vatican, and social justice groups are meeting for an emergency gathering in El Paso, Texas. It's designed to help groups confront issues surrounding the treatment and perception of migrants, including xenophobia and racism. Priests will bless the desert where many migrants have died. President Donald Trump is on his way to Hanoi, Vietnam for a second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He will attempt to build on their first meeting and call on Kim to abandon his nuclear weapons. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports from the North Lawn. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. U.S. intelligence officials have said North Korea is unlikely to fully dismantle its nuclear arsenal. Now, we haven't seen any missile tests from the country since President Trump's last summit with Kim Jong-un 8 months ago. Here's an optimistic President Trump before making that long flight to Vietnam today.
I think we can have a very good summit. I think we'll have a very tremendous summit. We want denuclearization. And I think he'll have a country that will set a lot of records for speed in terms of an economy.
On Twitter, the president predicting rapid economic growth for North Korea if it gives up its nuclear weapons. At the same time, he has lowered his expectations for this meeting, just last night saying he's in no rush and would be happy as long as the country doesn't test its weapons. You may remember President Trump was able to secure the release of some American hostages detained in North Korea last year. Today, during his flight to Vietnam, he announced via Twitter the release of another U.S. hostage, Danny Birch, who had been detained in Yemen for a year and a half. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. Vice President Mike Pence met today with Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido in Colombia. He says the White House has imposed new sanctions on allies of socialist leader Nicolas Maduro.
The day is coming soon when Venezuela's long nightmare will end, when Venezuela will once more be free, when her people will see a new birth of freedom.
The vice president was speaking at a meeting of regional leaders. He says all options are on the table to support Guaido and added, "We are going to continue to isolate the Maduro regime economically and diplomatically until democracy is restored." Voters in Cuba are expected to overwhelmingly approve the draft of a new constitution preserving the single-party socialist system. Updates would include recognizing private property. The largest number of no votes were expected to come from evangelicals and Catholics who object to language eliminating a requirement for marriage to be between one man and one woman. Pakistan has a desire to change its ways and get off America's blacklist of countries violating religious freedom. That's according to a top U.S. diplomat, Sam Brownback. He's in the Middle East, meeting with foreign representatives about how their countries can better protect people of different faiths, including Christians. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The ambassador at large for international freedom says he's been talking with Pakistan's foreign minister, who is promising to appoint a person to handle all U.S. concerns. Right now, Pakistan is one of the world's most dangerous places for Christians to practice their faith, largely because of blasphemy laws that carry a death sentence even for criticizing Islam. Now, Pakistan is just one of several countries Sam Brownback is talking about this week. He's also voicing concerns about Sudan in Africa and a couple of Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. However, he says both the UAE and Saudi Arabia have taken steps to promote the right to choose one's faith. He spoke in particular about the new Saudi leadership's approach.
They've got a long ways to go. They have made some steps, though, that I think are promising, and the comments out of the leadership are different now than you have ever heard, that I have heard in decades, if ever, coming out of the Saudi leadership.
Brownback has been meeting with diplomats in the UAE after he traveled to Pakistan. Many of the countries he's talking about, including Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, are designated by the State Department as countries of particular concern. That means those countries have engaged in, or at least tolerated, ongoing violations of religious freedom. Now, Brownback also thanked the UAE for hosting Pope Francis earlier this month. The Holy Father's visit and the papal mass were both first of its kind for the Arabian Peninsula. Sam Brownback also converted to Catholicism in 2002. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Up next, a new survey on the pro-life movement. And lawmakers on Capitol Hill debate a measure to help the unborn. A new poll finds in the past month, Americans have taken a sudden and dramatic move toward pro-life support. The main shift coming from Democrats. According to a survey from Marist Poll, 47% are likely to identify as pro-life, the same number as pro-abortion. Now, just last month, Marist found pro-abortion had a 55 to 38% advantage. And among Democrats, the number calling themselves pro-life in the past month rose from 20% to 34%. The Senate is voting on a bill to protect babies surviving failed abortions. It would require doctors and nurses treat those babies and rush them to the hospital. The vote is on the heels of national outrage over a New York abortion law and the words of a Virginia governor. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi is watching today's Senate debate. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says it's unsettling this is even a debate. He says a newborn baby is a newborn baby, period. And Democrats like Patty Murray say this bill isn't necessary. But today I met a woman who survived in a failed abortion, and she tells me how she received the same care this bill would require for people like her.
She did what some people in our world think is unthinkable, or it's just a conversation that someone can have, right, about what you're going to do about this life. She knew that I was in dire condition and rushed me off to the NICU, but my fate really rested in the hands of whoever was working that day. There is no difference between my story and the stories of the children who lose their lives to abortion every single day. So see our dignity and value and act on it as such.
Melissa Oden makes one last push for votes today on Capitol Hill. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act would punish medical professionals who fail to treat abortion survivors surviving babies like Oden. And one other note on a story we brought you Friday, the Trump administration made a final rule that in effect bans federal Title X family planning funds from going to abortion providers. Mark Irons spoke with presidential counselor Kellyanne Conway, and you can check out that clip as well as tonight's vote totals on our Facebook and Twitter pages, and we'll have a full recap of today's vote on our show tomorrow.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. As lawmakers on Capitol Hill consider that legislation to protect babies who survive abortions, a Catholic doctor and policy advisor says while today's conversation about the practice of infanticide is shocking, it's not surprising. In an article for Angelus News, Dr. Grazie Christie, senior policy advisor for the Catholic Association, writes, for more than 2,000 years, Christianity has been waging constant war against infanticide, but adds, the faith and morals that once made the elimination of unwanted children unthinkable has been slowly leaching out of our frayed social fabric. And guess who's here? Dr. Grazie Christie herself via Skype from Miami. Welcome back to our broadcast.
Thanks for having me on, Lauren.
17 medical and public health organizations, including Planned Parenthood and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, have signed on to this letter to senators in opposition to the Born Alive Abortion Survivor Protection Act, saying it represents a dangerous government intrusion into private health care decisions. Dangerous government intrusion. Grazie Christie, as a doctor, what's your reaction?
So these organizations have a trusting but misplaced faith in the kinds of doctors and nurses that go into third trimester abortion. This isn't your noble primary care physician who's been taking care of your family all your life. These are people who are in the business of eliminating children who are already viable, already almost about to be born. And yes, granted, some of them are disabled, but they're still valuable children. Every child born in the United States should receive the exact same medical attention, regardless of whether or not they are wanted or unloved or had been slated for elimination through abortion.
What's the significance of health care being politicized in this way? Dear senators, we the undersigned medical and public health organizations, what does it say about society that there's a need for legislation that guards against infanticide in 2019?
Well, it's that sad statement about our society. We have become a society that has forgotten this sort of instantaneous respect and tenderness that we have for every young life, regardless of where that life comes from and how much they are wanted and unloved. So it's a very sad statement about who we have become as a people.
You've taken a historical look at the topic of infanticide. It's saying Christianity succeeded in taming infanticide for some time in the West, but that awful human tendency to eliminate human obstacles resurges as Christianity recedes. What do you mean by human obstacles?
Well, so when I was writing this piece for Angelus, I did a little historical research into infanticide. It turns out, and this is going to sound harsh, infanticide is in our DNA. When we as human beings, we tend to want to remove obstacles, and children can be obstacles. They can be obstacles because of poverty or overpopulation, or simply they are just in the way for whatever reason. So we tend to want to eliminate them. So Christianity has been fighting against that in every land for the last 2,000 years. And we need to keep up the good fight and remember that every scrap of humanity is valuable.
Well, Senator Ben Sasse certainly is doing that up on Capitol Hill right now. Dr. Grazie Christie, Senior Policy Advisor for the Catholic Association, Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Keep in touch online. I get back to you eventually. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.